The dog found the body before Magda did, and for the rest of her life she would remember that the wind smelled of pine resin and burning copper, and that somewhere above the trees the Veluran orbital station was passing overhead like a slow second moon. Buddy was a mongrel, half Earth Labrador, half something the colony vet had stopped trying to name, and he had pulled the leash out of her hand and gone stiff-legged into the brush before she could call him back. By the time she pushed through the dwarf fir and the hip-high silver grass of the eastern park, he was sitting beside her with his ears flat to his skull, not whining, not growling, just sitting, the way dogs sit when they have decided a thing is bigger than them. The woman in the grass had been beautiful. That was the first thought Magda had, and she was angry at herself for having it. The woman had been beautiful, and she was not from Podcoa settlement. That much was clear from the cut of her jacket and the soft city pallor of her hands. A single thin wound had been put through the side of her neck with something so precise that the blood had barely traveled. Her eyes were open. Around her throat, on a chain so fine it looked like a strand of hair, was a small gold pendant in the shape of the letter W. Magda had not seen that pendant in 15 years. She stood very still. Buddy leaned his head against her thigh, and she put her hand on the warm flat of his skull and felt her pulse going hard against her teeth. Somewhere in the trees, a sparrowfinch was making the same 6-note call over and over the way they did at dusk, indifferent. Above the trees, the Veluran station passed, slow and silver, and Magda thought without wanting to do, I have to call this in. I have to go home. I have to tell Tamaz. Then she thought, no. First I look. She crouched. She did not touch the body. She had read enough novels to know not to touch the body. She looked at the angle of the wound, and the angle of the woman's hand, and the angle of the small clean boots, and the way the grass was bent under the left hip, but not the right. She looked at the pendant for a long time. Then she stood up, wiped her hands on her coat, though she had touched nothing, and walked back to the path with Buddy at her heel. She called the protectorate line from the path. She did not call her husband. The Veluran officer who came was tall in the way they all were, 3 meters of slender ringed plating and 4 long arms held in the parade rest. The protectorate insisted upon when dealing with what they called local sapient variants. His translator collar rendered his voice into a flat tenor pleasantness that always sounded to Magda like a hotel concierge who had never quite forgiven you for arriving. He took her name. He took her identifier. He glanced at the body, made a soft 3-note click that was the Veluran equivalent of a sigh, and entered the encounter into his slate. Non-combatant civilian, Category 3, he said, reading aloud as he typed. Witness, female, domestic. Designation Borowska, M. It's the pendant, Magda said. It belonged to a friend of mine. Weronica Bieleka. She disappeared from this settlement 15 Earth years ago. There was a case file. It was closed without resolution. The pendant, Madame Borowska. Translator caller did not interrupt. The Veluran officer simply spoke over her, and the caller adjusted. Your statement is recorded. Local sapient variant memory under stress is known to associate. The pendant is mass-produced jewelry of low credit value. We will examine it. It's not mass-produced. Veronica's father made it for her. He was a goldsmith in Krakow before the lift. There were 3 of them in the world. The officer's mandibles flexed in what she had come to recognize as polite disengagement. Your statement is recorded, he repeated. Please return to your domicile. A liaison will visit if further assistance is required. She walked home with Buddy and the wind in her face and the smell of pine resin still in her nose. And, she thought, that woman was killed by someone who knew what to do with a knife. And that pendant is one of 3 in the world. And the Veluran have just decided I am hysterical. She thought. Good. Tamaz was in the kitchen when she came in, looking at his slate and eating an apple over the sink the way he always did, as if the act of using a plate might bind him to the house in ways he had not consented to. He was a small man with a tidy beard and the careful, dismissive courtesy of a person who has decided long ago that he is the most intelligent adult in any given room. He had been a planetary engineer once. Now he subcontracted thermal audits for the Veluran and complained about the rate. You're late, he said, without looking up. I found a body, she said. He looked up. She had wanted for one ungenerous second to enjoy his expression. She did not. She told him about the woman, about the pendant, about the officer in even sentences, and she watched his face move through surprise and then, very quickly, into the soft contempt he wore when she said something he had decided in advance was foolish. Magda, he set the apple down, you read too many of those books. A tourist gets killed and you think it's about Veronica? Veronica ran off. Everyone knew Veronica ran off. Let the Vel handle it. He called me Category 3. You are Category 3. She looked at him for a long moment. The kitchen clock ticked. Buddy, under the table, sighed the long-suffering sigh of a dog who has lived in a marriage. I'm going to wash my hands, she said. She did, and she washed them for a long time, and while she washed them, she thought about the angle of the wound and the angle of the boots and the pendant her best friend had worn every day of the last summer they had been girls together, and she thought, I am Category 3. He is right about that. They will not be watching me. That night she could not sleep. She lay on her back in the bedroom that had once been her grandmother's bedroom. In the wooden house her grandmother had brought up on the second lift convoy in pieces in a crate, and she listened to Thomas breathing the slow, disapproving breath of a man who slept on principle. She thought about Veronica. They had been 11 when they met, both of them new to the settlement, both of them girls of the kind that small places do not quite know what to do with. Too loud, too curious, too prone to laughing in the wrong places. Veronica had been the louder of the two. Magda had been the curiouser. They had read every Earth Import paperback in the settlement library between the ages of 12 and 17, 2 copies each, swapping in the playground at recess, and the librarian had begun ordering them murder mysteries specifically because, she said, those 2 girls would eat them like apples. They had eaten them like apples, Christie, Sayers, Tay, Highsmith, the dark ones and the cozy ones and the ones in between. By 16, they could spot a red herring at 50 paces and could tell you, 6 pages in, which of the dinner party guests was lying about the trains. Veronica had wanted to be a journalist. Magda had wanted to be a veterinarian. Neither of them had quite become either thing in the way of bright girls in small colonies. Veronica had ended up at the Protectorate's Mineral Rights Office, filing junior administrative correspondence in 3 languages. Magda had ended up at Dr. Walchik's clinic, holding the heads of frightened animals while he did the necessary things behind them. They had still met every Wednesday at the Hunan Tea House in the square, and they had still spotted red herrings together, and they had still, in their late 20s, been the 2 loudest laughers at any table they were at. Then one summer, Veronica had stopped meeting her on Wednesdays. There had been a man, she had said the once when Magda asked. There was always a man. Magda had not pressed. She had been a year married then to Tomas, and she had not yet learned that the not pressing was the mistake. 3 weeks later, Veronica had gone, and the file had been opened, and the file had been closed, and the Wednesday tea house had taken her name off the standing reservation, and Magda had spent 15 years not pressing. She turned her face to the wall. Buddy, on the floor at the foot of the bed, made the small, soft sound he made when he dreamed of running. In the morning, the dishes were in the sink. Tomas had left for the audit office. Magda washed the dishes and dried them and put them away, and then she sat at the kitchen table with her coffee, and she did the thing she had not done in 15 years, which was to say the name of her friend out loud. Veronica Bieleka, she said. The kitchen did not react. Buddy lifted his head. All right, she said to him. All right. The Valuran's liaison did not visit. 3 days passed. The local feeds reported the killing as an off-world tourist incident, unresolved, pending closure. Magda went to the funeral. It was held in Briniewo settlement, 2 valleys over, in a small wood-built chapel of the kind the early colonists had put up before the lift, before the protectorate, before any of them had known what the sky was actually full of. The dead woman's name had been Joanna Maj. She had been a hairdresser. Her mother was a thin woman with eyes, the color of weak tea, and a wedding ring she kept turning on her finger. Magda introduced herself as an old friend from training, which was a lie, and the mother accepted it gratefully, because that was what grief did. In Joanna's room above the salon, while the mother made coffee downstairs, Magda found a photograph in a drawer. Joanna, at perhaps 20, in a summer dress, arm around a girl with dark hair and a wide laughing mouth and a small gold W on a fine chain at her throat. Veronica. Older than 15 years ago, but unmistakably Veronica. The photograph was dated 4 Earth years before, after her disappearance, after the closed file. Magda's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped it. She put it back in the drawer exactly as she had found it, and she went downstairs, and she drank the coffee, and she said the right things, and she walked out to the street, and she stood for a moment under the open sky with the Velaran station passing overhead, and she said quietly, to nobody, either you are alive, my friend, or someone wants me very badly to think you are. She did not cry. She had cried for Veronica 15 years ago. She had used up the crying. The photograph could be faked. Anyone with a half-decent terminal could age a face 4 years. But the date on it had been put there deliberately, and Joanna Maj had kept it in a drawer she meant to be found. And Joanna Maj was dead. That meant the photograph was a flag. It was being waved. Either by Veronica herself, from wherever she had been hiding for 15 years, or by someone who wanted to draw out whoever had once tried to make Veronica disappear. Either way, Magda thought, the only thing to do was walk toward it. That night, she opened a new file on her old terminal, the one Tomas did not bother with, because it was Earth-built and slow. And she began, in the careful margin notes hand she had used in her veterinary assistant days, to make a list of every person in Podkoa settlement who had been adult and present the summer Veronica vanished. She wrote down the goldsmith's son, the senatorial candidate Saliga and his wife Barbara, the printer Cheslak, the drunk Stefan who lived in the shack by the eastern fence, Dr. Walchak, who ran the vet clinic she had once worked in, Cherwinski, who owned the feed mill, Robert Mazur, who advertised himself as a clairvoyant and had once correctly predicted to her face that she would marry the wrong man. She drew lines between them. She drew lines from them to Veronica. She drew lines from Veronica to Joanna. Then she drew a long single line from all of them upward to the silver ring she sketched at the top of the page, and she labeled it Protectorate, because the thing she had not been able to say to the Velarin officer and could not say to Tomas was the simplest thing in the world. A girl had disappeared 15 years ago, and the case had been closed without resolution by the Velarin liaison office. And the case had stayed closed, and Joanna Maj had come to Podkoa settlement wearing Veronica's pendant, and now Joanna Maj was dead. Whoever had killed Joanna had not been afraid of the Velarin. Which meant, Magda thought, that they were not afraid because they had nothing to fear, which meant the Velarin already knew. She closed the terminal. She sat for a long time in the dark. Buddy came and put his head on her foot. "All right," she said to him. "All right." In the morning, she went to the police office in the settlement, which was a single prefab beside the rail station, manned by Jacek Sikora. Jacek had been her childhood sweetheart in the way that everyone in small colonies had childhood sweethearts, meaning they had once held hands at a harvest festival when they were 9 and then spent the next 4 decades pretending it had not happened. He was now a heavyset, gentle man with a Pink Panther ringtone he was embarrassed about, a Protectorate liaison badge he was embarrassed about, and a profound lifelong inability to look Magda directly in the eye for longer than 3 seconds. "Magda," he said when she walked in, "the Vel said you'd come. Did they? They said you were." He cleared his throat, distressed, associating. "They asked me to be gentle." She put the photograph on his desk. He looked at it. He looked at it again. He sat down slowly. "That's her," he said. "That's Veronica. It's dated 4 years ago. I can see the date, Magda. Then you can see what the date means." He was quiet for a long time. He turned the photograph in his fingers. He was, she thought, not stupid. He had only ever been afraid, in the way that decent men in occupied places are afraid, which is to say bone deep and chronic like a low fever. "Magda," he said finally, "if I open this, I lose my job. If I open this and I'm wrong, I lose my job. If I open this and I'm right," he stopped. "You lose more than your job." "Yes, then don't open it." She took the photograph back. "Help me open it." Quietly. As a friend who once held my hand at the harvest festival. He stared at her. He laughed once, a startled wet sound. He rubbed his face. "You're going to get us both killed, Magda Borowska." "I'm Category 3, she said. "They don't watch me." They began that afternoon. He had access to the closure file on Veronica's disappearance and to the recent Joanna Maj file, and Magda had a list of names, and between them they had the small, unglamorous skill of 2 middle-aged colonials who had lived their whole lives in a settlement of 900 people and knew which fences were broken and which back doors did not lock and whose dogs barked at strangers. The first thing Magda did was go to Dr. Walchak's clinic on the pretext of a flea consultation for Buddy. Walchak was a wide, soft-handed man in his 60s who had once, when she was 24, kissed her at a Christmas party and then apologized for 3 years afterward. She let him examine the dog. She asked him, in the easy voice of a woman who did not know what she was asking, whether anyone in town had ever come to him to dispose of something, a body, say, or a part of one, in the back of a feed truck on a summer night 15 years ago. He did not answer for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, that he had once been asked, and had refused, and had been told that the refusal would be remembered. He had spent 15 years remembering it. He did not ask her why she had asked. He said, "Be careful, Magda," he said. There is a back gate at the Saliga estate that opens onto the old service road, and the service road runs past the feed mill, and the feed mill has an incinerator. Then he turned away and washed his hands. She thanked him. She walked out. Jacek pulled the rail station logs from 15 years ago. There had been a freight movement out of the feed mill at 3 in the morning on the night Veronica disappeared. Signed by Cherwinski personally. Manifest blank. There had been a second movement 4 days later. Both had gone to a private depot on the Saliga land grant. The salon mother in Brniewo had kept all of Joanna's correspondence in a shoebox. Magda visited a second time with a story about a missing earring, and the mother, who had decided by then that Magda was a strange but harmless woman, let her sit at the kitchen table with the shoebox while she made soup. There was a single letter in the box, in Joanna's own hand, undated, addressed to no one. It was the kind of letter people write when they are about to do a dangerous thing and want a record left behind. The letter said, "Veronica is dead. I have known it for 14 years. She came to me one night in the 7th month and left her boy with me and went back to ask the woman for help and never came back. I have raised him as a cousin's child. He does not know. The pendant came to me through the post a month ago in a plain envelope with no note, which means someone who knew the story is still alive and is reaching for the boy. I am going to Podkoa settlement to find out who. If I do not return,
The boy's name is Powell. He is at the Hanan Tea House in the square, and his mother's name was Veronica Bieleka.
and somebody in that settlement put her down a flight of stairs in the summer of a year.
I will not write here because it will make me cry."
Magda read the letter 3 times. Then she put it back in the box, and she folded her hands on the kitchen table, and she sat very still until the salon mother came in with the soup. And then she ate the soup, and then she went home, and she telephoned Jacek, and she said, "There is a child. There is a 14-year-old boy in the square at the Hainan Tea House. We have to find him before the Velurin do." They found him that afternoon. He was washing cups in the back, under a name that was not his name. The tea house owner, a small woman from Hanan Colony, who had once given the young Magda her first cup of jasmine tea and her first murder mystery in Mandarin, took Magda by both hands when she explained, and said only, "I have been waiting for someone to come for him. Take care, he has her laugh." He did have her laugh. Magda did not tell him anything, not yet. She bought him a bowl of noodles, and she watched him eat them, and she went home, and she sat in the dark for a long time. What they could prove by the 11th day was that Cherwinski, the feed mill owner, had been at the Saliga house that night, that he had helped Barbara move the body, that he had then spent 15 years quietly extorting both of them, and that he had grown rich on it. They could prove from the salon mother's records that Joanna Maj had been Veronica's best friend in Brniewo, that Joanna had received the pendant by mail 2 months before her death with no note, that she had come to Podkoa settlement asking questions, that she had attended a fundraising party at the Saliga house the night before she died. They could not prove yet who had put the knife into Joanna's neck, but the angle of the wound, Magda thought, had been very precise, and Barbara Saliga had grown up on a protectorate frontier ranch and had been, in her youth, a competitive blade thrower. On the 12th day, Jacek called her on the secured line and said, "Magda!" The Vel pulled the Joanna Maj file. They've sealed it. They've also pulled Veronica's. Both files are now under protectorate discretionary closure. We are not allowed to discuss either case with each other or with any third party. You understand what that means? "It means they know," she said. "It means they know we know. Then we don't have long. No." She sat at her kitchen table after he hung up. The morning light was coming in across the sink and across the apple Tomas had left half-eaten, and across Buddy asleep with his belly turned to the warm tile. She thought about her friend, dead at 20 on stone steps in a summer garden, because she had asked a woman for help. She thought about Joanna Maj, who had sent herself across the valleys with a pendant around her neck like a flag. She thought about the Velurin officer saying local sapient variant memory under stress is known to associate. She thought, they will come for me. Today, probably. They will come gently, because that is the Velurin way. And they will conclude that I am distressed. And they will recommend a course of restorative leave at the Protectorate Medical Facility in the Eastern Hemisphere. And I will not come back, or I will come back and not be me, and Jacek will keep his job, and the file will stay closed. She thought, I have approximately 6 hours. Then she did 3 things in order. She made coffee, she fed the dog, she picked up her slate, and she opened her personal feed, and she sent a single message to a private group of 43 women. The group was called, in the directory, Eastern Settlement Fan Dance Circle. It had been started 6 years ago by a woman from the Han colony who had wanted to keep up the old practice from her grandmother's village. Magda had joined to lose weight after her second child and stayed because the women were funny. And because the dance, slow at first then sudden, the painted silk fans snapping open in unison like a flock of birds taking off, had become, without her noticing, the only 40 minutes of her week in which she felt entirely competent. The message she sent said, "I need help today. It is dangerous. Bring fans. The Eastern Park, 1600. She did not explain. She did not have to. Within 9 minutes, 41 women had replied with a single character, "Sure." Yes, she put on her coat. She put the photograph in her inner pocket. She called JSEC. "I need you to do something stupid," she said. "I need you to call the Veluran liaison office and report that Magda Borovska has begun behaving erratically, has made wild accusations against Senator Sliga, and is at this moment proceeding on foot toward the Sliga estate in a state of evident emotional crisis." A long pause. "They'll send a unit," Jacek said. "An arrest unit, possibly two." "Yes, Magda. They'll send it to the Sliga estate. They won't send it to the Eastern Park." Another pause. She could hear him breathing. "All right," he said. "All right, Magda, what are you going to do?" "I'm going to ask Barbara Saliga a question," she said, "in the park, in front of 40 women with fans. Magda Jacek, they classified me Category 3. They don't watch me. They watch the Saliga state. They watch you. They don't watch the Eastern Park at 1600 on a Thursday, because at 1600 on a Thursday, it is full of housewives doing exercise." He understood. She hung up. She called the Saliga house. Barbara answered on the second ring, sharp and bright and impatient. "Barbara," Magda said, "it's Magda Borovska. I have something of yours. I think you'll want it before the Velarin do. I'll be in the Eastern Park at 1600. Come alone. If you bring anyone, I give it to them instead." A silence. Then quite calmly, "What do you have, Magda?" "A photograph, dated 4 years ago. You'll know which one." She hung up before Barbara could answer. Her hand was shaking. Buddy looked up at her from the floor, and for one absurd second, she thought he was going to say something, and she laughed. "All right," she said to him. "All right. We're going for a walk." She got to the Eastern Park at 1540. The women were already there. They were in 3 loose rows on the grass at the eastern end where the practice usually happened. In their soft shoes and their loose dark trousers, the painted silk fans held closed at their sides. Mrs. Hahn from the bakery, Mrs. Olaziak, who taught the colony children, old Mrs. Gichkowski, who had survived 3 husbands and a tariff war, the teenager Ola, who Magda had not invited and who had come anyway because her mother had come, 41 of them, plus Ola, plus Magda. They did not ask her what was happening. They formed their rows. They warmed up. At 1558, Barbara Saliga walked into the park from the southern path. She was alone. She was wearing a pale linen suit and carrying a small leather purse, and her hands were in her pockets, which meant nothing or everything. She stopped 20 paces from Magda. She looked at the rows of women on the grass. She smiled. "Magda," she said, "what is this, a recital? It's a class. They meet here every Thursday. How charming. Barbara." Magda took the photograph from her coat. She held it up at arm's length between them 4 years ago, after the file was closed. "Joanna Maj sent this to me 3 weeks before she died. I made copies. They are with people. If anything happens to me, they go to the Earth Independent Press, the Tau Ceti Observer, and the Valoran Internal Affairs Bureau, who, as you know, cannot stand the liaison office." Barbara did not move. She looked at the photograph. She looked at the rows of women on the grass. She looked back at Magda. "You're lying about the copies," she said. "Probably. You're definitely lying about internal affairs. Probably. What do you want, Magda? I want you to say it. Here, with my friends listening. I want you to say what happened to Veronica on the steps in the back garden, and what happened to Joanna Maj in this park, and what Cherwinsky has been doing for 15 years. I want you to say it out loud, in the open air, in front of 40 witnesses, and then I want you to walk with me to the rail station and turn yourself into a human magistrate, of which we still have 3 on this planet, before the Velarin liaison arrives to make all of this go very quietly away." Barbara laughed. It was a real laugh, surprised and almost delighted. "Magda Borovska," she said, "you read too many of those books." "Yes," Magda said, "I do." Barbara took her right hand out of her pocket. There was a knife in it. It was not large. It was, in fact, the smallest knife Magda had ever seen in a hand that was clearly going to use it. A thin sliver of dark metal no longer than a finger. of the kind the old frontier women had thrown for sport before the lift. You should have stayed Category 3, Barbara said, and threw it. What happened next happened, Magda would later say, in the time it took her to draw one breath. The fan dance forms have an opening movement called Wild Goose Spread's Wings. 41 women, in 3 rows, at the silent count of the woman at the front of the right row, snapped their fans open in unison. The sound was like a single great wing beat. The painted silk caught the afternoon light. The knife, which had been thrown to pass Magda's right shoulder and enter the side of her neck at precisely the angle Joanna Maj's wound had been made. The knife passed instead through the open silk of Mrs. Hahn's fan, deflected 3 centimeters by the bamboo rib, and embedded itself harmlessly in the bark of a dwarf fir behind her. Barbara stared. Magda, who had not actually been certain the fans would do anything, and who had been operating, she would admit later, on the strength of a single half-remembered article about how the bamboo ribs of a traditional fan could turn a small blade. Magda did not let her face show any of this. She said into the silence, "Wild Goose Spread's Wings, Barbara, Thursdays at 4. You should have come." Barbara turned to run. She did not get far. Old Mrs. Jichkowski, who had survived 3 husbands in a tariff war, brought her down at the knees with a closed fan to the side of the head, which Magda had not known was a thing a fan could do, and which Mrs. Jichkowski performed with the unhurried competence of a woman who had once, in her youth, in a place she did not talk about, done worse things to worse people. The other women closed around Barbara in a loose ring, fans open, not quite touching her. Mrs. Hahn pulled the knife out of the tree and held it carefully by the very tip of its blade between 2 painted nails, and said, in flat practical Mandarin, "Evidence." Magda walked up to Barbara, who was on the grass, gasping, holding the side of her head. "Say it," Magda said. "Magda, there is a boy in this settlement," Magda said very quietly so only Barbara could hear. "He has her laugh. He is 14 years old, and he is washing cups 2 streets from where you killed his mother. If you do not say it, here now, in front of these women, I will bring him to your trial. I will put him in the front row. I will let him watch you lie about her. Or you can speak now, and the boy will not have to know your face. Which would you prefer, Barbara?" Barbara closed her eyes. She said it. All of it. She said it because she had been raised on a protectorate frontier ranch, and she understood. In the way ranch children understand when she had been outflanked by something she had not seen coming. And because the small private threat had finished the work, the public one had begun. She said it loudly enough for the 41 women to hear, and Mrs. Olesiak, who taught the colony children and had a perfect memory by professional habit, listened to every word, and her lips moved with each clause, committing it. When Barbara was done, Magda said, "Thank you," and stood up, and that was when the first Velurin arrest unit came down through the trees from the southern path. There were 4 of them. They were tall and ringed and held their forearms in parade rest, and the lead officer's translator caller said, in the flat tenor pleasantness of a hotel concierge, "Madame Borovska, there is a report of erratic conduct. You will accompany us for restorative assessment." Magda looked at him. She held up the photograph. "My name is Magda Borovska," she said, "and I am Category 3. And on my recording slate, which has been broadcasting on Open Channel for the last 6 minutes to 41 named witnesses, and to 3 human magistrates who have legal standing under the original Lift Treaty, Senator Saliga's wife has just confessed to 2 murders and 15 years of complicity in a closed protectorate case. You are welcome to take me for restorative assessment. You will need to take all of us, and you will need to explain on the Open Channel why." The Velurin officer was silent for a long time. His mandibles flexed. The translator caller did not translate the small clicking sound he made, which Magda thought might have been a Velurin word. The caller did not have permission to render. He said finally, "Madame Borovska, please remain at the rail station until a human magistrate arrives."
"Of course, officer, and Madame Borovska."
"Yes, your classification will be reviewed." She thought about that for a moment. She thought about Veronica on the stone steps in the summer dusk. She thought about Joanna Maj with the pendant at her throat. She thought about Tomas at the sink with his apple. She thought about Jacek Sikora at his desk with the Pink Panther ringtone and the photograph in his fingers and the long fear in his bones. She thought, "I am Category 3. I have always been Category 3. And today my classification saved a friend's name and put 2 killers in a magistrate's docket. Because nobody on this planet, including my husband, was watching the women in the Eastern Park on a Thursday at 4. She did not say any of that, she said politely. Thank you, officer. I'm sure the review will be very thorough. She walked Barbara to the rail station with Mrs. Jichkowski on one side and Mrs. Han on the other, and the rest of the fan dance class in a loose formation behind. And Jacek Sikora was waiting at the platform with a human magistrate he had called 20 minutes earlier on a line the Velarin had not yet thought to monitor. And the magistrate was an old woman with gray hair pulled back tight, and an Earth Court robe she had not worn in 11 years. Barbara was processed under the Lift Treaty. Cherwinski was picked up at the feed mill 3 hours later, and his cooperation, once it began, did not stop for 16 hours. Bruno Saliga, on the floor of the senatorial chamber 2 days later, attempted a long, carefully prepared speech about persecution and ended it, instead, in the middle of a sentence, sitting down and putting his face in his hands. Veronica's body was recovered 4 months later from a sealed pit on the Saliga estate, and her name was returned to her, and a small ceremony was held in the Eastern Park, and Magda planted a dwarf fir for her at the edge of the practice ground, where Mrs. Hans Fan had turned the knife. Paul was told, in the kitchen of the Hinnan tea house, by Magda and by the tea house owner, together, with a pot of jasmine between them. He cried for a long time. He asked, when he was done crying, whether his mother had been funny. Magda told him about the playground swaps, the librarian, 2 copies each, Christie, Sayers, Tay, the laughing. He listened with his head down and his hands flat on the table, and at the end he said, "I would like to read those books." Magda said, "I have all of them." I kept hers, too. He came to her house that Saturday, and she gave him the whole shelf in 2 crates, and he carried them home on his bicycle, and he came back the Saturday after that, and the Saturday after that, and by the end of the summer he was reading her Highsmith novels in the kitchen, while Buddy slept against his foot. Tomas left in the spring. He did not make a scene. He told her in the kitchen that he had been thinking for some time about the rate dispute with the Velurin, and the possibility of relocating to a contract on the inner worlds, and that he did not believe she would wish to accompany him. She agreed that she would not. He took the apple bowl. She kept the dog. She kept the house. She kept, by the unspoken consent of 900 people, the small standing reservation at the Wednesday tea house, and she began going to it again, sometimes with Jacek, and sometimes alone, and sometimes with Powell, who was old enough now to drink the bitter tea and pretend to like it. Jacek Sikora kept his job, the Velurin liaison office, in a quiet memo that was not made public, but that Mrs. Olesiak read aloud at the next fan dance practice, because Jacek had read it aloud to her over dinner, revised the standard classification matrix for local sapient variants to include a new subcategory under Category 3, subcategory C3R, reading habit indicated, caution advised. Magda framed the memo. She hung it in the kitchen over the sink, where Tomas used to eat his apple. On the first Thursday of the summer, she walked Buddy to the Eastern Park in the long, slow light, and the women were already there in their 3 loose rows, fans closed at their sides, and Mrs. Han nodded to her, and Magda took her place at the front of the right row, and at her silent count 42 fans opened at once, with a sound like a single great wing beat, and above the trees the Velurin orbital station passed, slow and silver, and Magda Borowska, Category 3, Subcategory C3R, reading habit indicated, caution advised, smiled up at the sky and did not look away.